All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second installment of Virtual Pizza and Politics. My name is Ashley Weissmiller, coordinator of PMP. Before we get started today, I want to give a special thank you to Senator Nancy Kassebaum, who asked that her 2016 Dole Leadership Prize be used in support of student programs. Our guest today is Mr. Joey Hentzler. Joey is a former Student Advisory Board member and Pizza and Politics coordinator. He is currently the director of advocacy at Kansas Appleseed, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. In 2019, he ran for Lawrence City Commissioner, coming up short by just 275 votes. And today we're going to chat about that and chat about your experience and what it's like on the campaign trail. But before we get into that, if you don't mind, would you briefly tell us a little bit more about yourself, your upbringing, education, and any special projects you're currently working on?
Yeah, so hi everyone. It's great to be here. We were talking about how full circle this is for me, having coordinated Pizza and Politics while I was on KU's campus as an undergrad. So I'm Kansas born and raised. I grew up in Topeka until I was 6, moved out in the county, rural Shawnee County after that. As a gay kid in Kansas, I came to Lawrence. I think that's a thing that many of us do, and I came for KU, and since then I've stayed. So that was in 2011, and so I did my undergrad at KU in political science and Latin American studies. I thought I wanted to go into international development, and so I did. I started that career path. I speak Spanish. I took 4 semesters of Quechua, the language of like the Inca Empire. There's like 20 million people who still speak it in the Andes. I was in Bolivia for my master's project when the 2016 election happened. And I was disappointed in the outcome. And it was really a call to action for me to come back home. And so after that, I quickly transitioned to politics. Which was kind of always in the mix for me,
Sure.
But not necessarily as a career. And so, I took the role at Kansas Appleseed. I'm a lobbyist for that organization and also support our campaigns in our statewide offices. Trying to advance like policy around foster care, food stamps, juvenile justice reform. But then also too, in my mind, there's only so much we can achieve through the advocacy route. And so that's why I put my hat in the ring for Lawrence City Commission.
Awesome. How did your work at the Dole Institute when you were at KU as a student help prepare you for your work in public service?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think really no disrespect for the education that I received at KU, but I think the connections and the emotional and relational learning that I did, the professional development that I did at the Dole Institute, is the most important thing that I got from my time at KU, among others, Model UN and other activities, but truly just like the ability to navigate spaces with professionals and to understand different aspects of campaigns and politics in our country and in our local city level politics. That from the Dole Institute was critical.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you were briefly talking about your work at Kansas Appleseed a little bit earlier. How does your work with that organization compare to the goals you had if elected as city commissioner?
Well, so they're distinct, right? I mean, Appleseed is a C3, so there's no ability to endorse candidates or anything like that, and so we always were keeping some distance as much as possible. No support or anything came from Appleseed for the election or anything like that. But certainly, like the mission of Appleseed is one that resonates with me, and so really it's just a overlapping of missions of the campaign and of the organization I work for with my personal beliefs and values. to, ensure that everyone in our community has the chance to live a life of dignity and happiness. And the way to achieve that is through policy. Was the whole, thesis for the campaign, and is a thesis for Kansas Appleseed as well. But yeah, I mean, my job involves policy research and advocacy. It involves a lot of negotiation and diplomacy with state legislators. It involves a lot of education with grassroots community activists. So that way, formerly incarcerated youth or former foster care kids can come with us to Topeka and use their voice to achieve the reform that they need for themselves and their communities. And that was, really trying to integrate that kind of work into our campaign. And for a long time, I think we were really trying to recruit candidates to run, and we're still recruiting candidates and running candidates this year as well, who are really committed to those ideals. And so I think I would say there was interaction between the campaign and my professional background in that way.
Cool. So at the Dole Institute, we learn a lot about larger campaigns and national elections and stuff on the larger scale. How does a city election compare and differ from the larger federal elections?
Well, definitely size and scale, right? And one thing that's weird or distinct of Lawrence is that every 2 years we elect 3 city commissioners. The top 2 vote getters receive a 4-year term, and then the third top vote getter, receives a 2-year term. And so there are 5 seats, and so every year 3 terms are up for re-election. And so that in and of itself just completely changes the dynamic when we're creating our campaign strategy and field plans. And so, instead of needing to win electoral college votes, our campaign estimated we needed 8,000 votes to get that first place spot. And, tellingly, the first place getter got 8,200 votes. And so, just the different aspects, right, of the strategy and the numbers, but then also too, right, like the conversations that you're having with voters, right? Like I'm not talking about the Iran nuclear deal or the Paris Climate Accord, but what I am talking about, right, is people's feeling unsafe in their community and how to bring investment back into their community so people don't have to live so insecure economically. Or also how global climate change is affecting our local community, right? Like every voter I talk to in like the, floodplain areas within our city, all of them experienced some kind of flooding last summer. And so they when we talked about climate change, we brought it down to the level of mold growing in your basement and you constantly having to run a dehumidifier in your basement, like that, like really tangible, localized impact of national, global issues was really critical.
Yeah. What did a normal day on the campaign trail look like for you? What was the day in, day out schedule that you had?
Yeah. So we also, a lot of it is like trying to deploy the candidate in the way that makes the most sense. And so with that in mind, a lot of what I did was fundraising. So I was doing some call time. I was, which is calling donors of people who I think are going to vote for me and donate to me. I did a lot of meetings with my team who were phenomenal and like deserve all the credit, by the way, with the communications we did, with the field work we did, which door knocking and text banking and phone banking. But I think too, like my background in campaigns was really important for the entire group. Like working with the the voter activation network, like Vote Builder, which is a program that allows you to interface with the voter rolls, to set up phone banks, to target voters on social media, to do that kind of stuff, was really important. But a lot of all of that became less and less important later on because we had educated other people to use those systems and to strategize. So a lot of what I did was educating and helping build new leaders throughout the campaign. And so then it got rolling later on. And of course, there are tons of other people who jumped into the campaign with skills already, communication skills and skills with recruiting and organizing and deploying volunteers who also did that work of educating and building up new campaign leaders.
Mm-hmm. How did you market? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, just, and of course, there were a ton of community events. I mean, we've had some events as a campaign, but there was just so many community forums. So, I practiced my stump speech, and then I used it every day at the forums, every day at the doors, knocking and talking to voters. That was really the huge majority of what I did.
Yeah. So how did you market yourself during the election? What was your marketing strategy that you used?
Yeah, well, so we identified like things about me that were positive and negative, right? I mean, I'm young. I was 26 last year when I ran. And that meant like by a decade, I was younger than the next youngest candidate. And so that was like a weakness in our campaign or something to overcome. And so, my background in policy was kind of our solution to that possible downside, right? Like, and I think it showed at public forums and on social media. Our campaign was consistently the one talking about policy, talking about the intricacies of our plans and our platform, and how, most importantly, it would impact the real, tangible, material conditions of our neighbors. And I think that really was kind of our solve to the idea that people might perceive me as young and inexperienced. And so, with that in mind, we deployed messaging across social media. Our campaign was the strongest on social media. We can see the internal numbers on Facebook, and so we, every day we were deploying that kind of messaging. The other thing too, which I think is really, really important at the local level, is just knowing who's running. And since I've only been in Lawrence for 9 years, not enough people probably knew who I was when I declared my candidacy. And so to reach that 6,200 vote total that we got, it took a lot of like introducing myself to people. And so a part of my story, right, is what I led with at the beginning. I came to Lawrence because it was a safe place for me. I perceived that early on in high school, like I would come here as soon as I got a car when I turned 16 to just be me downtown and hang out. But then, like as I continued to live and work and study in Lawrence, I realized that safety and that community wasn't existing for everyone in our town, particularly people of color and low-income Kansans, low-income Lawrencians. And so, that personal story, but then the connection of my personal story to other people's experiences in our town was really critical as well, to introduce myself to all those folks who ended up supporting our campaign.
Awesome. How important was face-to-face communication with constituents? What worked and what didn't work in terms of communication?
Yeah, I mean, face-to-face is always the best. I mean, that's why the campaigns this year in 2020 are going to look so different. And if anyone tells you they know how to win a campaign during COVID-19, they are full of something. But So yeah, I mean, every week we had a dozen volunteers on average knocking doors with me. And so, we knew, back to that vote count number that we wanted, the 8,000 votes. Um, you know, we had then, based off of that, how many doors I needed to knock, how many calls we needed to make. And so that's what we were doing constantly, face to face or over the phone. And I think when people really interacted with me, and we can see it in the data because we recorded every interaction at the door through our campaign technology, that when people became exposed to our platform and to myself, the candidate, they became supporters. And also, too, in the post-mortem of our campaign, you can see that in the precincts that we deployed the most canvassers to knock on doors, where we deployed our postcards, our mailers, those were those were the precincts that we won. And our campaign, we won either first or second place in the second most precincts of all the candidates running. And so particularly in East Lawrence, I think that's a real important thing to garner from there, is that our strategy and our tactics worked where we deployed them. And so, a part of this for us in many ways was to test a theory that a unabashed, progressive, democratic socialist candidate could win in Kansas. And I just cannot emphasize enough that a 0.73% loss is not a rejection of that theory. And in fact, our success demonstrates that, this is our first go. Our candidate was a, twinkie 26-year-old kid. Like, we can and will win in the future.
Sure, sure. So, do you think that city elected positions, um, do you think that they hold the representative more accountable than state elected positions, given the likelihood of truly knowing the needs of their constituents?
Well, no, it's all different, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so it's different from city to city. So I'm just going to talk about Lawrence.
Yeah.
Um, the number of votes to win in a Lawrence City Commission race is about the same as it is to win in the state house, to win a Kansas legislative
Okay.
representative seat, and that's because the entire city is our electorate.
Mhm.
And just the reality of it is that Lawrence has like 4 or 5 representatives cutting up different slices of the city.
Mhm.
And so, in Kansas, we are, lucky. We are blessed to be able to have um, such deep connections to our electeds, whether they're state or city. In California or higher population areas, that's not true, right? You need like 10,000 votes to win a school board election, which here, if you win 10,000 votes, you're a state senator or something, not exactly, but
Mhm.
the comparison. So I think both positions can be equally connected to their community and constituents. The thing that I think is different is the ability of the position, like the powers and the jurisdiction of the positions. So, you know, state representatives and city commissioners are both appropriators. They both can raise revenues through taxes and expend those revenues on programs or tax handouts to big corporations or, like the Brownback tax cuts. We can decide where money goes in both positions. I think the big challenge that is different from state and city is the lawmakers at the state level in Topeka are um, I don't know what the word is, but like supreme, right? Like they
Mhm.
can set laws that affect the city. The city can't do
Sure.
the opposite, right? And through like a series of preemption laws, the state has disallowed cities from doing things like raising the minimum wage, regulating firearms, labeling nutrition, requiring nutrition labels, protecting unions, lots of things the state has inflicted on cities, which is kind of ironic because the state legislature is controlled largely by conservatives who believe in small government. Yeah, the local level, right? You can still do tons. And I think that was another part of our campaign, right? Like the dominant conversation going into the campaign was sidewalks and sidewalk policy. Like and it legitimately so, importantly so, right? The city was requiring for the first time people who own properties to maintain their sidewalks and hold the burden of that cost themselves, which is impossible for seniors or people with disabilities or individuals on fixed incomes, right? But when we got into the race, our response to that was no, absolutely not. Like the people should not have to pay for public infrastructure, which is what sidewalks are. And then we jumped into everything else, right? Racial equality, housing, affordable housing for everyone, action on climate change. And I mean, when we did our media analysis, it became very clear our campaign was moving the conversation towards things like climate change, towards things like how the city is going to tackle racial justice. And that was really important for me.
Mm-hmm. So it's clear you take a lot of pride in your progressive ideas and that you were the progressive choice for Lawrence. How did your views on the issues relate or differ to your opponents in the commission race?
Yeah, well, so many of them overlapped, and it was interesting to see who agreed on what and not.
Sure.
There were more libertarian tendencies that I did not agree with, I'm in favor of tobacco 21, to raising the age to require to sell tobacco to my young people who are 18. And some people who I'm lock in step with on, tax handouts to developers, they were not excited about that. But then also when it came to properly funding social services in town, I found myself aligning with more conservative individuals, maybe that compassionate conservatism. And that was always going to be a part of our strategy governing, right? Is like campaigning versus governing is very different. And we got ahead of ourselves thinking about governing, obviously. But the ability to work and cross aisles is even stronger in the city commission race or the city commission level in Lawrence because it's nonpartisan.
Awesome. So you were talking a little bit about COVID-19 earlier. So if something like what we're experiencing today happened during your campaign, how would you have handled it? What would you have done?
Yeah. Well, so I think a lot of what is happening right now is, suffering and pain. Whether people are sick or their relatives have passed away, or also just their hours are cut, they've been furloughed. That pain is real. And so, the thing though about COVID is that a lot of that pain and a lot of that struggle also existed before. And it's not that the pandemic just created inequality in our community between essential workers who have to risk their lives to continue to keep our grocery stores open versus myself, who works at a nonprofit and can Skype in. That inequality existed before, it's just been exacerbated. And so we were trying to connect to that that level, that understanding, that issue. And so we would definitely be doing that right now. We would also probably be trying to help our community. I'm also a community organizer, outside of the nonprofit advocacy space. I also work a lot with our Sanctuary Alliance group in town, which is so close to achieving sanctuary policy in Lawrence. check them out. And, like our first response as community organizers is to care for the people in our community, care for our neighbors and our loved ones. And our campaign would probably start turning towards that, doing digital events, maybe helping people go through the food stamp application, doing events like that, to really like get on people's radar, that we care for them, and that is at the root of our policies and our platform is the humanity of our neighbors and how to recognize that humanity and support the aspirations of all families and all residents in Lawrence.
Mhm. Awesome. So I have a few more questions for you. What was the biggest challenge that you faced when running for city commission?
Um, well, so I've shared, right, like our campaign strategy, our campaign plan was to achieve 8,000 votes.
Sure.
We got 6,200 and came short. And so I think but again, right, and as we said, where we did deploy resources, we achieved our outcome that we wanted. And so I think where we fell short was just scale. Instead of a dozen people donating their time every week, we probably needed 24 for the last 2 months.
Mhm.
I think that, I mean, like it sounds so small, right? It sounds like, oh, well, that's such an easy
Mhm.
and concise and technical answer. But in many ways, that probably would have been it.
Yeah.
Because everything else, we raised like $16,000 above and beyond the 12,000 we wanted or thought we
Mhm.
needed, and our social media engagement was 10 times the next candidates. So yeah, I think field was
Mhm.
where we could have invested more time, where I could have invested more time. Again, we already had incredible volunteers and incredible organizers supporting the campaign to activate those volunteers. I think we just needed to all clone ourselves to really get into other neighborhoods.
Mhm.
One of the Lawrence Journal World had an article where the editor Chad Lawhorn kind of did an analysis, and it was great. And he was right. We lost West Lawrence, but
Mhm.
we did not deploy a single canvasser west of Iowa. We did not
Interesting.
knock a single door west of Iowa, which was, not the plan.
Mhm.
But when we were prioritizing what precincts to hit, none of them were really west of Lawrence, maybe around 27th in Iowa, that area, like Crestline. But
Mhm.
yeah, we just needed more scale, and I
Mhm.
think that goes back to again, my age and my. I mean, I have a fairly strong connection and network in Lawrence, of
Mhm.
course, but if the next time around that we support a candidate that's running, we're going to have an even bigger network, and I think that's why I feel so optimistic.
Mhm. So I have one more question for you. So do you think another election is in your future at all? And if so, what would you run for? And would you do anything differently?
Um, I don't know yet.
Mhm.
Um, I have already said no to one opportunity that has presented itself publicly just now, but
Mhm.
no, I can't say yet.
Mhm.
I'm actually in Chicago right now with my fiance. He's
Mhm.
finishing his postdoctorate in child clinical psychology. Um, I'm sheltering in place here. I still live
Mhm.
and work in
Yeah.
Lawrence, but we have to figure that out. There's some personal stuff. So I think that's really the thing that matters most. Um, but the thing that is already happening, I mentioned, right? Like we are running other campaigns and supporting other campaigns. That group of people who came together and grew their expertise and also their camaraderie and trust in one another during our campaign. They're now out in the world supporting other progressive candidates, which is very exciting and really an amazing outcome for our campaign. I think the do differently is exactly what I just said, right? Like invest more in field, and maybe like, you know, maybe we should have just paid someone like $1,000 a month to coordinate those volunteers. There's a lot to consider, but yeah, I think that's really it. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Joey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to chat with me a little bit today. And thank you everyone for tuning in to our second and final PMP virtually. I want to thank you all and thank everyone at the Dole Institute for their help in putting on these programs. Hope everyone stays safe and healthy, and hopefully we'll be back at the Dole Institute here pretty soon. Thank you.